Hey, what's going on, guys? Before we get into this video is actually a video request from one of the G tier channel members. Over on my Discord server, I have a dedicated channel just, dedicated to video requests. So if you guys ever want to send me video requests directly, that would be the best place to do it. And again, if you're a channel member or if you're a Patreon, you guys get like the priority in terms of which ones I'm more likely to choose. But anyway, this video request comes from Ryan Revengeance, and again, he's a G tier channel member. He also has a great YouTube channel that I highly recommend checking out. I'll go ahead and put that down in the top link in the description. And he had asked that I rank every single Souls game from my most favorite to my least favorite. Needless to say, this is definitely going to be an interesting one, and it's definitely going to be a controversial one. All that I ask is that everybody please keep the toxicity down to a minimum in the comments. Remember, this is the internet, and the internet is made up of a bunch of different people with many different backgrounds, many different opinions, and at the end of the day, that's all that this is. This is an opinion. My opinion isn't wrong, just like your opinion isn't wrong. You can have yours, I can have mine. I have to preface every single Souls video by saying that, because the Souls, the Souls community, there is some chill people over there, but there's also a lot of, how do I say this? Opinionated people in that community, to say the least. So without further ado, my most favorite Souls game. This is gonna be hard for me, because usually I go from like worst to best in my ranking videos, but he requested that I do favorite to least favorite, so I'm kind of going in reverse order here. But anyway, my favorite Souls game of all time is hands down Dark Souls 1. Where do I even begin with this game? I'm not gonna do like full-on reviews in this video, but I'm at least gonna try to like, point out some of the things that I really love about that game, some things I don't like about that game, just like, the first things that come to mind. I probably should have written down some notes or some sort of script for this, but this is how I like to do my videos. I like to do them off the top of the dome, just so, because I feel like when I do it that way, then it's like more realistic. Like if it's sticking out in my mind in the moment, then that has to mean that those are my true feelings on it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? But anyway, Dark Souls 1, where do I even begin with this game? The first thing that comes to my mind, the interconnected world. The interconnected world is something that they haven't nailed since Dark Souls 1. I mean, I'm trying to think back to it now, and yeah, there really isn't any other game that has tried to do it to this degree. I mean, Dark Souls 2 kind of tried to do it, but I mean, it didn't work. The elevator to Iron Keep, yeah, no, we're not even gonna talk about that one. My favorite thing about the interconnected world in Dark Souls 1, because for me, I don't need an interconnected world in a Souls game, right? As you guys will see here very soon. The thing about the interconnected world in Dark Souls 1 is that it not only is it, seamless, and not only, it makes sense, right? Like when you go from Firelink Shrine up to the Undead Burg, and then, you continue your journey up to the church, to the Bell Gargoyles, like everything makes sense. And the same goes for the rest of the game. Especially later on, once you get the Lord Vessel, and then you have to go get the Lord Souls, like, the whole time it makes sense. And even then, once you unlock all those extra areas, once you get the Lord Vessel, it's one of those things where it's like, wow, I didn't even know that these areas were here before, but the fact that they are here, like, they make sense in the context of the world and those locations. I think one of the main reasons that keeps Dark Souls 1 as being my favorite among all the other Souls games, no matter what Souls game has come out, is, I mean, it's a combination of things, right? I mean, it's just the game as a whole, like, every element of the game, but one of the main things about it is that it feels so purposely handcrafted, so meticulously crafted to a degree that From Software themselves haven't even been able to top, Even in later Souls games, as we'll be talking about here soon enough, like, I mean, they had to resort to, like, warping around the world in order to have it all make sense, but in Dark Souls 1, there isn't any of that. I mean, maybe the last area, kinda, maybe, because you have to technically warp there, but it's not really even warping there, it's just, like, the serpent taking you there. But I think the thing that I love about Dark Souls 1 is that, as you're going on throughout the game, you really feel like you're going on that journey, and the thing is, while you're going on this journey, and the journey gets more grand and epic, you always have Firelink Shrine there at the center of it all to, like, ground you. It's the one place you can always go back to. It's one place you can always relax at. There's barely any music in the game outside of boss fights and Firelink Shrine. And every time you hear that Firelink Shrine tune, it's so good. And not to mention the fact that even though there is this interconnected world, there is ways to access other locations that aren't necessarily as connected, like you think the Undead Asylum at the beginning of the game. There's reasons to go back there later in the game. Like, there's purpose for everything in the game. That's my main thing. Everything has a purpose here. Everything feels like it belongs. There isn't anything that's shoehorned in. And even for the annoying areas, like, say, the Poison Swamp in Blighttown, it feels like it belongs in the context of the area. I could go on and on about, the masterfulness of the interconnected world in this game. It's just the world as a whole, and the levels and the areas. There's just, it's so good. Like, all of it is just so good, but there's so many other elements in this game that I want to touch on as well, but we simply just don't have enough time to do here today. Like, the gameplay and the build variety and the weapons and the combat. The combat is part of what makes this and the next game my favorite in the Souls series. The combat in this game and Demon Souls, which I kind of just spoiled it. Yeah, the next game on the ranking is going to be Demon Souls. It feels purposeful, like you're balancing your stamina bar. Okay, do I block here? Do I need to dodge here? Am I able to attack here, or should I wait for my next opening because I got to manage my stamina? Whereas everything after, you know, Dark Souls and Demon Souls, it's just, I don't know, it's a dodging simulator. I mean, like, Dark Souls 2, you still kind of got some of that meticulous gameplay, but it started relying more on the dodging, and I don't know, it's just... you know, the later games are cool, but I don't know, there's just to a certain extent, it's like, ooh, yay, let's go play Dodging Simulator number 47. It's just, I don't know. Like, yeah, you can still block in the later games, but I don't know. It's definitely not incentivized as much as it was in the earlier games. And I'm not saying I want a game where you have to block the entire time. I'm just saying I like a game where you have to think about it. Like, do I dodge this move? Do I block this move? And you know, it felt more meticulous. Like, it was more of a dance to the death rather than like a dodge to the death and an RNG fest. And that's part of what Dark Souls 1 got so perfect. It's that dance to the death with each of the bosses, like when you're fighting Ornstein and Smough. I'm gonna shut up now. We really have to move on to the next one, and I'm gonna try to pick up the pace here because I spent a lot of time on Dark Souls 1. But seriously, yeah, like the bosses, the atmosphere, the lore, the story, the characters, the tone of the game, the combat, literally everything about this game, I just love it. In my opinion, it's a perfect video game outside of a few things towards the end. Yeah, you already know what I'm talking about. Some of the bosses towards the end, like Lost Izalith and Bed of Chaos. Honestly, if it wasn't for Lost Izalith and Bed of Chaos and like maybe like the Tomb of the Giants too. Otherwise, Dark Souls 1, man, chef's kiss. It's outside of Lost Izalith, Bed of Chaos, and a few other lackluster areas. It's honestly a perfect video game. Next up on the ranking, we have Demon Souls, and there is a few games on this ranking where I'm going to be taking the approach that I'm taking with Demon Souls, and that is, I'm not going to say a whole lot about it because this is still an exclusive to the PS3 and the PS5. And, you know, if you have a PS5, which is, you know, still, even though the console's been out for 3 years now, it's still, I mean, it's easier to get your hands on it now. Like, you can walk into the store and see one, but, you know, it's still up there in the price. And then when it comes to the PS3, obviously not as many people have a PS3 because, you know, most gamers nowadays, I mean, like a whole generation is here, right? So a lot of them are younger. They weren't even alive for the PS3, which makes me feel really old because I remember when the PS3 was still new, and honestly, when I look at the PS3, it's still new to me, man. But anyway, Demon Souls, the one thing I will say, if you are to play Demon Souls nowadays, please play the PS3 version. The PS5 version, it's fine, it looks shiny, but it's not the real game, okay? I've played it, and it's just, the art, like, there's a lot of things, it's more of an art thing, right? Like, in terms of music choice, and art style, and direction. A lot of it was lost in translation with the remake, and I just, there's something about the remake, I can't play it. It feels lifeless. You know what I mean? Like, it feels very artificial, I guess is what I'm trying to say compared to the original. But anyways, that being said, because that's like a whole can of worms, that's a whole conversation for another day. Demon Souls, what do I love about Demon Souls? The atmosphere. That is the main thing that draws me back to Demon Souls. Well, I mean, that's not the only thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that I love about Demon Souls. Like, don't even get me started on the bosses in this game. They're like, some people will criticize the bosses, but I'm sorry, you know, you can go play your Elden Rings and your Dark Souls 3s with your dodging simulators. If you have fun spamming circle all day, you know, you do your thing. But in Dark Souls 1 and in Demon Souls, the bosses, you never knew what to expect, and that is more so the case in Demon Souls than any other game. Like, sure, once you figure out the gimmick or the puzzle for the fight, yes, you know how to fight the boss on literally every single playthrough after that, but I mean, when it comes to me and my video games, I play a game one time, and that's probably going to be it, and, you know, I might revisit it in a couple years, I might not, and that's how it was with Demon Souls. You know, I played it a handful of times, and I absolutely love it every time, but for me, when it comes to video games, I care about that first time experience more than anything because that's what truly matters, right? And when it comes to Demon Souls, I feel like in terms of the bosses, it gives you the most unique first time experience out of any Souls game. And yes, I stand by this. Not necessarily in terms of boss design and, like, you know, boss aesthetic, but rather the combat with the boss and the way that you need to engage with the boss. Do you get the most unique experiences with each of the bosses? Do you get the most unique like aesthetic differences or the most unique like amount of mechanics in each boss? No, you know, that obviously goes to the later games. But in terms of the different things that you're tasked with in Demon Souls, like when you have to take out each of the bosses, whether it be pressing different buttons or using like the Storm Ruler, or even once you get to like those more like hand-to-hand fights like with Old King Alon towards the end of the game, you never know what to expect with the Demon Souls bosses. And granted, there's a few times where it may feel rather unfair. I'm thinking to like towards the one boss in the church, you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, what? Like if I didn't explore there, how was I supposed to know that that was the thing? But you know, that's the thing. You're rewarded for your exploration in this game, and that's another thing. Like, When I think Demon Souls, I think like Metroidvania. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not necessarily like a Metroidvania by definition, I guess, but it's like there's something about it where it almost feels like a Metroidvania because, like, going back to the boss that I was just talking about in the church, like, if you wouldn't have taken out that the one person, you wouldn't have been able to actually fight the boss. But I guess the one thing that I love about Demon Souls that I also love about Dark Souls 1 is just the not only the exploration, but the atmosphere and the design of the levels. Like, that's what it really comes down to. Like, when you're playing Demon Souls, when you're playing Dark Souls 1, you're in that world. You feel like you're in that world. You know what I mean? There's something about it that just pulls you in a way that the other Souls games just haven't been able to do for me, because to an extent, it almost all feels believable. Whereas for like every single Souls game after this, I mean, there's some believable aspects in that. You know, I'm not saying that a video game needs to be believable to be immersive. That is not what I'm saying at all. But I mean, if you see the type of video games I play, you know, that's far from the case. But I mean, in terms of the context of the world, there's just something about some of the later games where I truly do feel like there's a disconnect, and they feel unapologetically gamey. And for the most part, again, in video games, that's not a problem for me. It's just in context of the Souls games, at least compared to what we had seen before in Demon Souls and Dark Souls, where it feels so grounded and like this really could happen. There's just a few elements of some of the later games where I'm like, really? Anyway, before I go off, you know, on a whole thing there with Demon Souls, before I possibly spoil anything for anybody that hasn't played it, please play Demon Souls. It is a must play. Anyway, on to the next ranking. This is where some of the complaints start to come in. That is Dark Souls 3. And my biggest gripe with the game is the fact that you have to like warp everywhere. Why do you need to warp everywhere? From the start of the game, I literally didn't even know where to go because I didn't realize that I had to sit at the bonfire and then warp to the next area. It's pretty lame. Outside of that, we're just going to start like bullet pointing some of these things. The bosses in Dark Souls 3 are the best in the entire Souls series, hands down. I know I said I like Demon Souls. The reason that I like Demon Souls bosses is the number of ways that you have to deal with the different bosses. Like, you never know what to expect. Is it going to be a puzzle? Is it going to be a hand-to-hand fight? With Dark Souls 3, most of the bosses are just a hand-to-hand fight, but that being said, the hand-to-hand fights that you have in that game are the absolute best. Aesthetically speaking, mechanically speaking, in terms of fairness and difficulty, Dark Souls 3 is literally like the perfect Souls example that I always go to whenever it comes to describing why I love the bosses so much in the Souls series. Like, the bosses in Dark Souls 3 are just absolutely phenomenal. I believe they are near perfection. Soul of Cinder is literally the perfect send-off to the entire Souls trilogy. I know some people point towards Gale. Gale is a cool DLC boss, but for me, Soul of Cinder is where like the series really ended. You know what I mean? Because like after that, that's when the credits roll. So Soul of Cinder, thematically, in terms of the lore, the gameplay, everything, I felt like that was perfect there. The gameplay for the most part is pretty good. Some of the areas are rather lackluster. I really don't like Farron Keep, and I can't even remember the name of the church, but you know, the big church where it's easy to get kind of lost up in there, and then at the end you have to fight what's the name? The Cathedral of the Deep? Am I even thinking of the right boss name? It's sort of like a puzzle boss. I don't know. That area was like okay, I guess, but for the most part, the main thing that I love about Dark Souls 3 is like, for the areas that are great, they're great. For the areas that are not so great, they're really not great. The bosses are all great, and then like the build variety and the gameplay. I feel like the main thing that keeps me coming back to Dark Souls 3 is the boss fights and the fact that the gameplay is just so refined in this game. The way I look at it, it's like Dark Souls 1, but like really cleaned up with a bit of a Bloodborne-ification to it. And again, the boss fights are just really good. The only thing that keeps me from wanting to replay it more often than I already do, which again isn't, you know, a big deal, because for me it's the first time playing that really counts. But it's just the lackluster areas, because for the areas that suck, oh man, do they suck. One last thing, normally when it comes to games, I don't really care about DLC, just because, you know, for me, it's the base game that matters, right? You know, that's the thing that you're going to get on the disc or when you download the game. But in terms of DLC, man, I'm going to just say it right now. It is the best DLC that From Software has ever created, and I've played all of them. Dark Souls 1, it's a close second. I really love Dark Souls 1 DLC with Artorias and Manus, but I don't know. It's just something about Dark Souls 1 DLC where, like, honestly, this is a hot take, but I feel like Dark Souls 1 is better without the DLC. Manus is just a mess of a boss. Like, I mean, you know, once you learn it, it's fine, but when you're first going up against him, he's a nightmare, and I know that's the point of Souls games, but man, that one hits different with, like, the slowness of Dark Souls 1. It's a fun challenge, I guess. Artorias was actually a great boss, but otherwise, like, the areas in the DLC, they were alright, but I enjoy that's more of like a spin-off area in Dark Souls 1, you know what I mean? That's like an expansion on Dark Souls 1, whereas like DLCs later on kind of feel like they're interconnected with the main game. Dark Souls 1 DLC just kind of feels like it's like a weird all-shoot expansion, but the base game of Dark Souls 1 is definitely where it's at its best, in my opinion. I know that's a hot take. Everybody has their own opinions. Please remember that. Anyway, yeah, Dark Souls 3 DLC. Oh my god, it is so good. Anyway, on to the next game. We have Sekiro. This is another one where I really don't want to say too much about it because barely anybody has played Sekiro compared to the other ones. So all I'm going to say about Sekiro, just to avoid as many spoilers as possible, because believe it or not, compared to the other Souls games, there is actually a decent amount of story and cutscenes and such in this game. The combat. That's the main thing that I must say. The combat and the art style. When I think of Sekiro, those are the two things that I really go towards. The story too. The story was actually really good in this game, but the combat, it feels so satisfying to pull off. Don't listen to everybody else online. They're always saying how like, oh, Sekiro is like so impossible. It's not that hard. It really is not that hard. Just give it a little bit of time. Give it a day or two. You'll get the hang of the. You'll get a hang of the mechanics. Sure, some of the bosses you'll probably get stuck on, but that's how it is in any video game. The combat is great. It's flashy. It looks good. It sounds good. It feels good. When you're deflecting the hits, it just. There's something about that gameplay loop of deflecting hits, building up the meter, striking when ready, or striking when the meter's full, and then like taking chunks off enemies' health and bosses' health. It's so satisfying. It feels so good to play, and again, the art style, it's so good. If you haven't played Sekiro, please go and do it. I want to say more, but I can't because I don't want to spoil it. Even talking about some of the gameplay mechanics and the tools that you get, I feel like that's spoiling it, because using those things for the first time, it's just, it gives you this feeling, I can't even explain it, like, it feels so good, like, as the game goes and you get more of these tools and this equipment, like, you feel yourself getting stronger, but you're never too overpowered, because Sekiro is all about that balance, the balance with the sword, and it's just, please play Sekiro if you haven't. You need to. Next up on the rankings, Dark Souls 2. I really don't need to go too in depth on Dark Souls 2. We all know why it's kind of it's an okay game. Combat doesn't really feel that good. Bosses, they aren't really that great. But for me, it's all about the atmosphere and Majula. Honestly, Majula and the first little bit of the game and the last little bit of the game are the reason why it is ranking higher than you'd probably expect. Some of the earlier areas in the game, like the Forest of the Fallen Giants and Hades Tower of Flame, I like the art style. I like, some of the bosses, and I don't necessarily like the bosses. They're pretty lackluster, but it's just, they fit in terms of like early game Souls areas. They're not too hard. They're not too easy. That's kind of a lie that all the bosses in Dark Souls 2 are actually really easy. I don't know. I'm trying to defend Dark Souls 2 right now. Okay, I really like Dark Souls 2, and I'm tired of having to be attacked for saying that online. Okay, I love Dark Souls 2, and I don't see why it's such a big deal. Like, sure, when I try to compliment Dark Souls 2, it's hard to think of anything. It's one of those things where, like, when you're playing it, you're enjoying it to a certain extent. I don't know. There's, like, it's really conflicting because you have those areas, like, some of those higher areas, then you got, like, the final stretch of the game with Dragon Lake Castle and some of the other parts where it's, like, it's actually really good. Then you got the other areas, like Earthen Peak and Iron Keep, and I don't know, it's just, oh, God, now I'm thinking about Iron Keep, and oh, God. Let's just try to reorganize this a little bit. Bullet points. Highlights, atmosphere, certain level designs, build variety. PvP is pretty okay. PvP is really overrated in Dark Souls 2, if I'm going to be honest. The only reason that PvP is so good in Dark Souls 2 is because of the build variety and differentiating mechanics. Negatives of Dark Souls 2, weak bosses, bad level design, bad world design, enemy spam, the agility stat even existing in the game, hitboxes, clunky combat. Back to the positives, the characters are really good in this game. I really like the Firekeeper chick. The stories, pretty solid. If I can go back to the negatives for a second, though, the tone in this game absolutely sucks compared to Dark Souls 1. That's a rant for another day. I'm not even going to get into it, because if I get into it, I'm going to be stuck here talking about it for the next, 20 minutes. The tone in this game sucks. It's all about, oh, you're not going to make it, whereas in Dark Souls 1, there was a bit of that, oh, don't go hollow. There's people on the sidelines egging you on, wanting you to actually win. But in Dark Souls 2, it starts, the old granny's like, hoo, you're gonna die, you're gonna lose all your souls. So yeah, Dark Souls 2, mixed bag to say the least. Oh, back to the negatives, the DLC sucked in this game. People are like, oh, the DLC's great. No, dude, the DLC's overrated, DLC sucks. The base game is honestly a lot better. Back to the positives, the graphics are questionable at first, but, the graphics, I don't want to say they're bad on purpose, because they're not bad. They don't look bad, but it's just compared to Dark Souls 1, at first when you're playing it, it may seem like a downgrade. But then you have to, once you adjust to it, you realize it's more of an art style thing. And while sure, it doesn't actually look like, art is so subjective, so it's hard to say that it looks bad or good. But it's for some reason, I like it, okay? It works with the game. Sure, could it maybe use some more shadow work? But I feel like to a certain extent, the look of the game almost contributes to his personality, and it's really hard to explain, but I dig it. I feel like the fact that I had a hard time constructing my thoughts is rather fitting for Dark Souls 2, though. You know what I mean? Because that's how the game is. It's not necessarily a mixed bag, because I still like the game and I thoroughly love it, but it's like, you know, there is a lot of conflicting things there. So, yeah, I don't know. That's Dark Souls 2. Probably ranks a lot higher than a lot of you would have thought, but now it's down to the last 2 games. Next up, we got Bloodborne, and I know I just made a lot of people mad. Bloodborne is a game, all right. This is another one that's a Sony exclusive, so I'm gonna try to be careful with what I say, because, you know, there's a lot of Xbox and PC folk that have been dying to play this game for years, and I know they're watching this video. Some of them may know stuff about the game, or they may be the ones where they know a lot about the game, but they haven't played it and still don't want too much spoiled. So we're gonna try to keep this as generic as possible with my descriptions. Okay, the bosses were really lackluster in terms of their design, the aesthetic, the story. It's just, I don't know. It's just there's something about the bosses where it's like they existed in the world, but I didn't care about them at all. Like they just, oh, it's another fluffy furry beast. Oh no. Mechanically speaking, they all pretty much played out really similarly. I don't know. I mean, like Mikolash is in the game. That boss sucks. I don't know. Like, I don't know. There's something about the Bloodborne bosses. Like they're fun, they're fast, and they're frenetic, but like, once you learn how to be one Bloodborne boss, and I know there's going to be people that disagree with this, but I'm telling you from somebody that has beaten the game multiple times, and I know there's other people that have beaten the game multiple times that are going to end up disagreeing with this, but I've only beaten the game a handful of times, and I can tell you, even by the time I got to my second playthrough, dude, once you beat one boss, you can beat them all. You just got to know when to dodge. I don't know, just whenever they go to hit, just start spamming circle. You'll be all right. Honestly, the dodge thing in this game is so overpowered. The sidestep, like, you could sidestep just about anything, man. I'm not saying the game is too easy or anything. It's just, I don't know. There's something about the depth of the combat in this game. It just kind of fell into the same repetitive pattern of like slash, 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 maybe do a few transform combos, sidestep, and then, you know, you're fighting the fluffy furry beasts. And I don't know. My biggest problem with Bloodborne for me personally, you know, from a gameplay front, it's okay. It's a fun game to play. It's rather satisfying to play, but it's just like there's something about the atmosphere of the game where it doesn't pull me in. I don't feel myself getting pulled into it or connecting with the world in the same way that I did with the Souls series. It's just like there was a really big disconnect. That's my biggest thing with the game, and it's not even a problem with the game because that's more of a me thing, and that's like one of the most subjective things about a game is whether it connects with you on that personal level. And for me, Bloodborne just didn't. So we'll kind of hit the pros and cons real quick. Pros: combat, great. Level design, great. World design, pretty solid for the most part. There was no like areas or levels that really stick out in my mind as like being bad. Same thing with the bosses. It's just there were so many times where things weren't bad, but they also weren't good, and they were just like middle of the road bleh for me when I was playing the game. Maybe it's because it's the last Souls game I played. I played every single Souls game, including Elden Ring, before Bloodborne. So maybe that has something to do with it, but I don't know. It's just the game as a whole. I hate using this word because it's so Gen Z, but it's like it's kind of middle of the, like it's kind of mid. You know what I mean? Like for me personally, you know, opinions. It's kind of middle of the road. Yeah, I don't know. Bloodborne's cool. If you haven't played it, like, I highly recommend playing it. It's a great game. And that's one thing to remember. You know, we're talking about Souls games here. So Souls games, all of the Souls games are absolutely fantastic. But that being said, this is one of the weaker links for me personally out of any Souls game. Again, many positives. Great combat, great bosses, great areas, great world design. But for the negatives, it's really just I couldn't find myself. I couldn't really connect with the game. Maybe that's on me. I went into it expecting like a Souls-like spin-off, and you know, this was just something else entirely. So if anything, that's probably more of a me thing, and I'll just need to go into it with a bit of I guess more of like an open mind or a different mindset when I go to replay it again or something. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good game, worth playing, but probably not one I'm going to revisit anytime soon. Lastly, we have Elden Ring, and honestly, this is another, I feel like I've been saying this a lot in this video, but this is another game where it's like, I could give this a whole video on its own, and, you know, this game is so massive, so we're going to break it down. Let's go ahead and do the whole positive, negative bullet point thing. Positives. World design, level design, art style, build variety, story, music, basically everything about the game that makes a game is pretty solid on that front. My only problem with Elden Ring is, well, we'll just go ahead and kind of run through a couple of them. The bosses in this game, I don't know what FromSoft was smoking, but the bosses in this game were just not it. And similarly to Bloodborne, really the big thing why Elden Ring ranks so low is because out of any Souls game, I could not connect with this game at all. I felt no emotional connection to this world. I rarely had like a full-on immersion with the game. It was just, there was something about it. There was like that disconnect there the entire time. something about Elden Ring, you know, the Souls games felt so personal, and this one felt so grand and artificial. Like, from the beginning of the game, you're the chosen one. It's like one of those chosen one stories, you know what I mean? And I guess to a certain extent, a lot of Souls games are that, but I don't know. It just felt so much more unbelievable here. Like, you get to the round table hold, you talk to the chick by the fingers, and she's telling you, like, this is like a cardinal sin. Like, you know, it seems like a huge deal, and then you just click the prompt, like, yeah, I know. And then she's like, oh, okay, well, fine, cardinal sin, let's do it then. So less of my complaints with Elden Ring are even like a complaint about the game themselves, because I love Elden Ring. It's a great video game on a fundamental gameplay front. It's just, there's so many like unbelievable shoehorned in aspects of the game and the story where it's just like, wait, that shouldn't be happening like that. Why is that character just okay with this? Or why is this character here? Or like, it's just, I don't know. There's a lot of things where it feels very video gamey. And again, video gamey things aren't bad. It's just that in a game that tries to take itself so seriously and like, you know, have it feel grounded in a certain way, there's a lot of elements where like, the video gamey elements start to clash with it, and it's really hard to explain what I'm trying to say here. There's just a lot of times in the stories and the quests in this game where it's like, okay, this is happening because this needs to happen, you know what I mean? Like, somebody wrote this. And then the other thing for me, so really my only complaints with Elden Ring are two things, but those two things are pretty huge. My connection and immersion and the atmosphere of the world itself is just rather lacking, but then the other thing is the bosses. Oh my god, the bosses. An RNG dodging simulator fest of absolutely nothing. I never felt a sense of accomplishment in this game. In any other Souls game, I always felt a sense of accomplishment after beating any difficult boss. In this game, no. Literally never. It was just, okay, is the RNG my favorite this time? Or no? Like, there is skill involved, but, I mean, like, is there? Like, for some of the bosses, yeah. I mean, most of the bosses, it does come down to skill. In fact, I would say for all of the bosses, it comes down to skill. But at the same time, it's also like an RNG fest of like when they're gonna do certain moves. I don't know. Man, I've beaten this game so many times. There's gonna be people in the comments for, you know, any of my complaints with these games be like, oh, you just need to get good. Listen, pal, I have gotten good. I've beaten the game multiple times. I've beaten Elden Ring without summons, without summon ashes before. You know, I've done all these different things. I've gotten good. I've beaten the game. I've mastered the mechanics. But at the same time, it's like, there's so many times in this game where, you know, even if you're not dying, even if you're just simply taking hits, it feels like BS when you're getting hit. Because it's not like I have trouble dying in this game. Like, I can beat so many of the bosses in this game, no summons, no summon ashes, without any of that, and I can beat them first try just because I played the game that many times. I've mastered most of the bosses in this game. There's just a lot of times still where, like, you get hit at certain points, or certain bosses do these, like, insane chains of combos where it's like, where is the cohesion in this? Where is the design? It just feels like they were put on like a, you know, one of those like RNG circle wheels. What are those things called? I can't even think, you know, like the Wheel of Fortune circle. And it's like, okay, what move are they going to do next? Where Dark Souls 1 felt handcrafted and meticulously designed, this one felt like it was programmed by like a psychopathic murderous AI. And then that's not to mention all the recycled content and the fact that when you encounter a boss in Elden Ring, it lacks all the impact that encountering a boss in any of the previous Souls games had, because in the previous Souls games, you encountered a boss, you're like, oh, go, like, here we go, boss fight time. In Elden Ring, it's like, oh no. It's time for another boss fight. If I could sum up Elden Ring in one sentence, it's From Software bit off more than they can chew, but that's okay, because it's still a phenomenal game when you're sticking to the main quest and the legacy dungeons. It's great. It's just when you start to interact with every part of the game and you go off and do all the different side content, or you try to, you know, see everything that the game has to offer, that's when the cracks start to show. And on the first playthrough, it's a decent time, but on the repeat playthroughs, it only gets worse and worse and worse. At least it has for me personally. So I beat the game a couple of times, and I'm cool with it there. The first time was probably, I probably should have stopped out the first time, honestly. Like, I had a decent time during the first, but every time after that, the cracks just started to show more and more, and every time I go back to that game, at this point, I don't even want to go back to the game. I'd rather go back to any other Souls game. But anyway, that's the video. I've been sitting here recording for, like, over an hour at this point, so, yeah, I have a lot to chop up and try to turn into, like, a 15-minute video somehow. I've been talking so much. But anyway, I know I ticked off a lot of people in this video, and that is completely okay. Your angry, toxic comments only drive up the engagement of this video, so please leave comments. I beg you. Dislikes count as engagement too, so go ahead and leave me a dislike. Let's get this video out in the algorithm, eh? Anyway, thanks for the video request, Ride and Revengeance. This one was actually a lot of fun to make, even though I could barely construct my thoughts. This taught me the important lesson that I'm going to need to start writing scripts, or at least like jotting down notes before I make these videos again, because I can already tell without editing this, like, it's already been a mess, but you know what, it was still fun anyway. And anyway, as always, a massive shout out, thank you to all the Patrons, thank you to all of you in the low baller tier, and an even bigger shout out, thank you to all of you in the big baller tier, Mellow Asking, and Big Danny Manny, and the biggest shout out, thank you to all of you in the G tier, Ride and Vengeance, and Little Cheese Girl. Thank you guys so much. You guys are literal legends. I love you. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.